Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Eruvin Daf Kuf Dalid is the last full Daf in Maseches Eruvin, and it discusses three more areas of Hilchos Shabbos which are different in the Beis HaMikdash than elsewhere, and these are special Gzeros Midrabanan that don't apply in the Beis HaMikdash because of the necessity of the mitzvahs there. The three discussions are spreading salt or some other material on wet ground to make it dry. There, the potential concern is that you'll end up leaving it there and you have essentially built up the ground. You've added to the ground, you've smoothed the ground, you've flattened it, and it's a malacha of bainat. The next halacha is that of turning a wheel to draw water. There was a wheel that had pails set in it, and by just turning the wheel, it would turn the pails into a stream so that the pails would fill up with water, and then it would turn over the top and it would pour out somewhere else. So that was a very simple and easy way of drawing water from a stream, or from a well even. And then the third halacha is that of hashmas kol, making a sound. Now these two are really related. The Gemara is assuming that the problem with the wheel is that it makes noise and it's forbidden to make certain types of sounds, loud noises on Shabbos. The Gemara will say that's not the problem with the wheel, it's different, but along the way we'll have a lengthy discussion as to what's asar as far as making sounds on Shabbos. And then we get to another Mishnah, which brings in our last and final halacha on the daf, and that is about muktzah, removing a sheretz, a rodent that has tumah, how much you allow to violate muktzah in order to get it out of the Beis HaMikdash. So let's begin. In our first Mishnah, it talks about the first two halachos. It says that one is allowed to spread salt on the ramp up to the mizbech. It used to rain, the ramp was made out of stone, it got very slippery, you're allowed to spread salt there. And you are, as far as using the wheel to draw water, so you're allowed to use it to draw water from the well called Goyla and the well called Hagadol, the big well. Those two you're allowed to draw from. Those were both in the Mikdash. There's another well called Hakir that you're only allowed to use the wheel to draw from on Yantif, not any other time. Okay, so now the Gemara first of all discusses the halacha about spreading salt. The Gemara has two kashas. First of all, we have a contradiction from a brisa. So Rav Ika mi Pashrunya asks the kasha to Rav. He said you have a brisa that clearly says that you're allowed to spread straw on the ground. How come this Mishnah says you're only allowed to spread salt in the Mikdash? Sounds like everywhere else you're not allowed to. So the Gemara says straw is different. Straw you're not going to leave there. Straw you spread it on the ground and you lift it up afterwards. You feed it to your animals, so you're not building it into the ground. The salt gets ruined once it's spread on the ground, especially if it gets walked on, and therefore you have a potential concern. We are concerned that you are building, you're attaching, you're changing the layout of the ground, and therefore it's forbidden. In the Beis HaMikdash, they allowed it on the ramp, but elsewhere it would be also because of that reason. Now the Gemara has another kasha here, and this is not related to Hilchos Shabbos. The Gemara says, how could you spread salt on the ramp? If you're planning on leaving it there and you're attaching it to the mizbeach, it becomes built into the mizbeach, that's forbidden. You're not allowed to add building materials to any part of the Beis HaMikdash. It's supposed to be made out of stone, not salt. Hashem told all the instructions of the materials to David HaMelech. You can't just make up your own. And if you're not planning on leaving it there, so then besides Hilchos Shabbos, well, if you're not planning on leaving it there, you don't have a Hilchos Shabbos issue. But if you're not planning on leaving it there, it's a chatzitza. The rule is that the skin of the kahana has to be in direct contact with all the vessels and the walls and the floor of the Beis HaMikdash whenever they're doing avoda. So how do they have a right to walk on salt? They need to walk on the ramp of the mizbech itself. So the Gemara says the answer is that we're referring to where they are walking up the ramp, not for the purpose of avoda. Now, why would they be walking up the ramp not for avoda? So the Gemara has two attempts at this. The Gemara's first attempt is that they're bringing the organs of the karbanos up there. The actual bringing of the organs is not avoda. The Gemara says only putting it in the fire as avoda. The Gemara rejects that. The Gemara has a pasuk that clearly says and it calls it avoda. It's referring to bringing the organs. So Gemara says no, it's referring to bringing wood for the fire. They had to bring wood up the fire. They walked on the ramp, but that was not avoda. Okay, now Rava says a halacha which is contradicted, and then he's chayzer. Rava says that you're allowed to spread straw on the ground because of the rain. And he taught this in public. And Rav Papa said to him, that's wrong. We saw you have to have a shina. You're only allowed to use the broken bottom of a carton in order to spread straw, to make sure that people understand that it's a special halacha for straw and that you can't leave it there. So Rava took a speaker and he announced, I made a mistake. The correct halacha is that you're not allowed to just spread straw whenever you want. You have to do it with a shina, with the bottom of a box. Okay, now referring back to the Mishnah, the Gemara wants to discuss the halacha that you're only allowed to draw water with a water wheel in the Beis HaMikdash, but elsewhere it would be aser. The Gemara is going to go to a totally different subject, the subject of making sounds on Shabbos. The Gemara is going to discuss what those sounds are, which sounds are included in the Isser to make sounds on Shabbos. Now, the Isser there is based on the fact that if you're going to make sounds, you may end up making musical sounds, and if you make musical sounds, you may end up bringing musical instruments, and if you bring musical instruments, they may break, and you may fix them. So the question is, what type of sounds are included in this? So the Gemara is going to bring a discussion about it, and there will be 4 proofs. And the last and final proof will be from our discussion of the water wheel. The Gemara will assume that the water wheel's problem is that it makes sounds. So the Gemara says that Ula went to the house of Rabbi Menashe, and somebody came and he knocked on the gate, and he made a loud noise. He was knocking on the gate. So Ula said, why is he banging on the gate? He's being Mechal Shabbos. He's not being Mechal his body because he's being Mechal Shabbos. Rabbi said, wait a minute, it's not Chil Shabbos. Chil Shabbos is if you make a melodious, rhythmic sound that sounds like music. There we have a concern that you may bring a musical instrument and it'll break and you'll fix it. But somebody's just making a racket, like this guy, so there's no Isser with that. So now the Gemara tries to show 4 sources where we do see that there is an Isser to just make noise, even if it's not melodious or rhythmic. So Abaye brings the first proof. It's from Abaisa that says 2 things which you are allowed to do on a Shabbos. First one has nothing to do with our discussion. The first one is you're allowed to transfer wine from one barrel to another barrel by using 2 hollow tubes that you fit together. You slice them at an angle and you fit them together. So in essence you have one long bent tube. Then you suck wine out of one until it pours into the other, and then you can leave, and once you've started the suction, the flow will continue from one wine barrel to another. Okay, that you're allowed to do on Shabbos. It has nothing to do with us, but the second case there has to do with us, and that's you're allowed to use a certain type of noise-making instrument where you have a kli that has holes at the bottom and a stopper at the top. So you fill it with water and you stopper up the top. Now, because of air pressure, if the top is stoppered, nothing falls out of the holes in the bottom. And then when you want to make sounds, you take the stopper out and the water pours in many streams and makes a sound of rushing water when it pours onto a metal lid that you have. So the Gemara says you're allowed to use this noise-making device only for a sick person. But for a healthy person, you're not. So what's the Isser there? Isn't it not? Because you're making sounds, and there's nothing rhythmic or melodious about that. So you see that it's us to make noise, even if it's not rhythmic or melodious. So the Gemara says, no. You thought that the usage of this is that the sick person's asleep, and you want to wake him up. And you don't want to wake him with your hands because you don't want to startle him. So therefore you use this noise-making device, and that's why it's just a racket. That's not what's going on. The sick person is trying to fall asleep and is having trouble, and this makes a nice, soft, soothing sound of rushing water, and therefore it'll help him. But there, it is a melodious sound, and that's why it's usher. But if it would just be a racket, then it wouldn't be usher. Okay, where's the next proof? Comes from a brisa that discusses people who would guard their fruits or their squashes. They shouldn't be eaten by birds or by animals. So it says you're allowed to stand there and watch them. You have to be careful not to chase the animals or the birds away by clapping, by slapping your hand on your leg, or by stamping your foot. Those things are not allowed. So the Gemara says, what would be the reason for that? Obviously the reason is making noise, and there's nothing rhythmic about it. There's nothing melodious about it. So you see that it's also even to just make noise. The Gemara says, no, that's not the problem. The problem over there is not making noise. The problem is that if we let you do normal interactions, we're afraid you're going to end up throwing a stone at them. To do that, throwing a stone would be Esed D'Oraisa. You'll be transferring from Rishus Yachid to Rishus Rabbim. Therefore, we do not allow you. We want you to have a shina. We want you to make sure that you do not do the things that you normally do, so you'll remember not to throw stones like that. Okay, the Gemara's third proof is from a a statement of Rabbi Yehuda, name of Rav, that says that women should not play a game on Shabbos that they usually do, where they have a number of nuts on a board and they roll the nuts into each other to try to get them to knock into each other. The Gemara says, well, the reason is probably because of the noise. The Gemara says, not the reason is not because of the noise. If it would be because of the noise, how would you explain the fact that the same halacha was said by Rav Yehuda about playing the game with apples? Apples don't make noise when they knock into each other. The problem is that you need a flat surface in order to be able to play the game. We're afraid that they'll play it on the floor and they'll end up smoothing the floor, and that would be an isser of boina, of ashvuya gumis, of smoothing out holes. Now the Gemara brings a proof finally from our Mishnah. You're not allowed to draw out water with a water wheel, only in the base of Mikdash is it okay? Which is, what's the isser? Obviously that it makes a racket. Those pails sloshing around make a racket. So you see that, again, making a noise, even though it is not rhythmic or melodious, is also on Shabbos. The Gemara again says, no, that's not the isser here. It's nothing to do with sounds. The issue here is that since it's so easy to draw water with this device, we're afraid if we let you use this device on Shabbos, you can end up drawing water for your garden or for your field or for your abandoned house, whatever it is. You'll end up watering the ground. We don't want you to do that, and therefore you shouldn't draw water with this at all. Now, on that subject, the Gemara quotes a statement from a Meimar that he was in Tanav Mechuzah, and he permitted them to draw water with a water wheel. He said the whole reason for the problem is that people are going to use it to water their gardens and their chorvas, their abandoned homes. Well, there's none of these things exist in Tanav Mechuzah, and therefore there's no problem. But then he saw that people were using it to fill up a vat so they could soak flax. Soaking flax is an isser on Shabbos, and therefore he canceled that heter. He said this is not a good idea, and there was no longer any heter allowed in Mechuzah to use the water wheel despite the non-existence of a garden. Okay, we now turn to the last phrase in the Mishnah, which was that they were allowed to fill up a well called Be'er Hakir. They were allowed to do that on Yom Tov. So Gemara says, what is this well? Why was it called Be'er Hakir? Gemara says, it's called Hakir from the word Shehikru, that they called. What happened was that when the Jews left Bavel to return to Eretz Yisrael, they needed water, and so they made a special heter. They repealed the isser of drawing water with the water wheel. They made a special heter to draw water from this well here, and they called a announcement. They said that we are allowed to repeal the previous decree because we need it. We need water, and therefore, as a special incident, they named the well after that. Which says it can't be true, because the Brisa, which describes the incident to which you're referring, says that they only allowed one of the Be'eros Hakir. And it seems that there were a lot of them. And if the one that you were, if the name Be'eros Hakir was given because they allowed it, then the other ones wouldn't be called Be'er Hakir. It seems like there was some other reason why it was called Be'er Hakir, and they only allowed this one for that reason. So what is the reason that it had that name? It can't be because of they allowed it, because all the other ones were not allowed. Someone says that, no, you're right, the name applies to any well which is a freshwater well, meaning that there's a spring in the bottom of the well that fills it on its own constantly all the time, and it's based off a pasuk in Yirmiyah. It says, Kakir Bayer Mimel, like a well that's flowing. So too, there's a lot of things happening. He's referring to the bad thing that's happening to Yerushalayim. So the phrase Hakir means that it's a freshwater spring that fills up, and there were a lot of those, and one of them was permitted for the use of the people who came back to Eretz Yisrael from Bavel. And the Gemara quotes the Brisa in its entirety. It says that they came and didn't have water, and the Nevi'im that were among them said that we're going to repeal the original decree and you're allowed to fill up water from this well. The Gemara adds it wasn't really Nevi'im. There were Nevi'im there. It was Chagis, Chaya, and Malachi were there. It wasn't them. It was the regular Jews at the time who said that our fathers created the decree and gave us permission to repeal it if we need to. And they remembered that this had happened in the past and that they allowed it. And they're called Nevi'im because all Jews are B'nai Nevi'im, so they refer to them as Nevi'im. Okay, we now begin the next Mishnah, which discusses the Isser of Muktzah as far as moving a dead sheretz. Now, the situation here is where a sheretz that is Matame, creates Tumah if you touch it, has died in the Beis HaMikdash. So this is an emergency. We need to get this thing out of here as soon as we can because it's going to be Matame, the Mikdash, and it's a Bizayon, it's a disgrace for the Mikdash to have it there. So the Mishnah has two discussions. First of all, how do you get this thing out? There are two options. One is that you go find a flat piece of wood that is not Makabel Tumah, so it doesn't become Tameh, and you push it out. The other thing is that you take the nearest thing, the nearest Kohen can grab his avenate, one of the big day kahuna, and scoop it out. Now he'll be Matami his avenate. Won't be Matami himself because the avenate becomes a Rishon L'Tumah, and the Rishon is not Matami a person, certainly not in the Mikdash, but he will be Matami another thing. So this is not that great because you're spreading Tumah, the avenate becomes Tameh. On the other hand, the other solution is not that great because you have to wait till you go find a flat piece of wood like this. You grab the nearest thing. So what's the preferable approach? So the Gemara says, the Machlokes Tanna Kama says you should use your avenate, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Berka says you should use your avenate, and Rabbi Yehuda says you should go find a flat piece of wood. Now another Machlokes is which areas of the Beis HaMikdash does this have to be cleared out of? Where is the Kedusha high enough that you're allowed to move it even on Shabbos where it's Muktzah? So Rav Shimon ben Nana says you're allowed to move it out of the Heichel, that's the building of the Beis HaMikdash. The Ulam is the front room, the entrance room of that building, and the entire space between the Mizbeach and the Ulam. The entire area from the Mizbeach on west, it all has Kedusha, and you'd be allowed to remove it from there. But anywhere else, such as the rest of the Azara, you would not be allowed to remove it on Shabbos. Rabbi Kiva says, no, the entire Azara you could remove it from, because somebody who's Tameh walks into the Azara gets kares, and therefore it has that high level of Kedusha. Outside the Azara, you wouldn't be allowed to remove it on Shabbos, you should just leave it. What should you do? So you should cover it up with a copper pot so that nobody touches it, and then move it after Shabbos. Now the Gemara adds two statements of Reb Shimon. Anytime a Chazal allowed you to do something, such as in the Beis HaMikdash, they only really allowed you to do something that is me'ikar ad-din, that the real halacha is that it's mutter. They didn't allow a real isur to be usur, just like in the Beis HaMikdash, they only allowed you to violate the Rabbanans, not isurei de'oraisa. Okay, now the Gemara begins, and the Gemara introduces a slightly different subject. The Gemara wants to try to base that subject on the Machlokes in our Mishnayos. What's the subject? Are you allowed to bring a sheretz itself into the Beis HaMikdash? So, we know clearly you're not allowed to bring something which became tamei into the Beis HaMikdash. That's a pasuk. It says, you have to send out any man or woman who became tamei. If you have to send them out, you can't bring them in. The question is, what about something which is tamei, like a sheretz itself? So if Tavi Bar Kisa says in the name of Shmuel, it's not usher to bring that into the Beis HaMikdash. There's no isser deraisa at least. There's no kares, and there's no chatas. So the Gemara wants to try to, first of all, prove that he's right, and the Gemara will reject it. The Gemara's proof is as follows. Braisa, that quotes Rabbi Yosef Galili, who says that you don't have to send out a kli cheres, an earthenware kli which became tamei. So the Gemara says, what's the reason? Why do you have to send it out? It must be as follows. You only have to send out, the pasuk describes male or female. Male or female are things which could become tahar in a mikvah. Kli cheres cannot become tahar in a mikvah. If a kli cheres becomes tamei, you have to break it. Mikvah doesn't help it. So that would seem to be the rule. Anything which could become tar in a mikvah, you can't keep in the Beis HaMikdash. Anything which cannot become tar in a mikvah, you could keep in the Beis HaMikdash. How does that apply to a rodent, a sheretz that's dead? It definitely cannot become tamei in the mikvah, cannot become tahor in a mikvah, and therefore you have to send, it should have the same rules as a kli cheres. You shouldn't have to send it out, which means you're allowed to bring it in. There's no issue to bring it into the Beis HaMikdash itself. Gemara says not necessarily. There's a far more logical way of explaining why a kli cheres doesn't have to be sent out of the Beis HaMikdash, and that's that a kli cheres can never become an av hatumah. A man and a woman could be an av hatumah. It could be a zav or a zav. They can be an av hatumah themselves. They could easily. Other kelim could also become an av hatumah. If a zav or a zav sit on them, they become an av hatumah. Kli cheres can never become an av hatumah. That's why there's no isser to have it in the Beis HaMikdash, even if it became tamei. That would definitely not apply to a sheretz. A sheretz is an av hatumah itself. So this is not a proof at all. Okay, now the Gemara wants to say maybe this subject of whether or not you're allowed to bring a dead sheretz into the Beis HaMikdash is actually what the two machlokes in our Mishnah are about. The first machlokes we saw is, should you get it out right away with whatever is nearest, or should you go find a piece of wood which will not become tamei? So Gemara says, you would seem to think that the machlokes is about, is it allowed to be there or not? If it's not allowed to be there, then you have to rush up and get it out as fast as possible. If it is allowed to be there, you could wait till you find a piece of wood. Gemara says, no, that's not the machlokes there. Everybody agrees it's not allowed to be there. The machlokes is What's worse, spreading Tumah, having more things become Tameh, or leaving Tumah there longer, which is a bigger urgency? And that's why one says, go get a piece of wood which won't spread Tumah, and the other one says, no, go use whatever is nearest so that you can get it out as fast as possible. The second machlokas in the Mishnah was how far do you have to remove it? Can you be machal al Shabbos derabanan and break halachos muktzah to get it out from the entire azara, or only the place west of the Mizbeach? So the Gemara wants to say that the one who says west of the Mizbeach, let's say, listen, it's allowed to be in the Beis HaMikdash. The only problem is west of the Mizbeach. That's where the Shechina is. You don't want it to be there. That's disgraceful. So that's why you're allowed to remove it from there. But having a sheretz inside the Beis HaMikdash itself, besides for that issue, is not a problem. The other Shita says, no, it is a problem. You don't want to have it anywhere in the Azara. The Gemara rejects this. The Gemara says, no, their machlokes is not based on that. Their machlokes is actually based on how you learn a pasuk. They each derive their halachos from a pasuk differently, but we'll save that pasuk for our last daf.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.